I'm sure you guys all know it's an absolute privilege to be sat here with two sort of real icons and innovators within makeup. Wonderful Val Garland, who worked with Alexander McQueen for almost a decade on some of his most iconic shows, The Birds, Voss, Eshu, and some of their most iconic looks were created between 2000 and 2005 after Garland had begun collaborating with M.A.C Cosmetics. And very aptly, I've also got M.A.C's Director of Makeup Artistry, Barber, who worked backstage with Val to create those most amazing looks. And they are looks that continue to shock and inspire and delight in equal measure today. And before we kind of delve into what was going on backstage and on the runway, we're just going to look at a short video which will just give you some insights into some of those amazing catwalk highlights. Now, one of the things I think that you get a real sense of from that presentation and those images is how much Alexander McQueen pushed definitions of beauty. You know, he saw beauty in things that other people just didn't, and I think you see that in the exhibition and you see that in these images. And I want to understand, did that extend to his view of makeup? Was he always kind of pushing you, always challenging you to do things that you never perhaps thought possible?
Absolutely. First of all, I'd like to say so many of my original makeup McQueen team are here in the audience, and I just want to say absolutely fantastic to see you all here. Incredible. And right from the get-go, we would, I'd have a meeting with Lee like about a month before the show, and we would discuss what the looks were. And there is many a makeup artist in this room that was in my lounge room like 3 weeks before the show, going over the looks, and then we'd do Polaroids and I'd take them back to Lee, and she'd be like, yeah, I like it, but can you push it a bit more? And so the makeup, was a very integral part of Lee's look. And one thing in particular, which you don't sort of feel or see so much anymore in catwalk shows, is we would do the makeup, team would be ready to go, and then maybe the night before we would have had a run through with Lee, and then I would go home. It might be kind of like 11 o'clock at night. And then I'd get a phone call from Sam Gainsbury at 3:30 in the morning. Lee wants you down at the show space because he wants to check the makeup with the lighting. And sometimes Terry would come with me. We'd go down there with two models, get them under the lights. It's 3:30 in the morning. You know you've got a call time at 7:30. You are fingers crossed, legs crossed, tongue crossed, everything crossed that he's going to like it and not change it, because you haven't got time to tell the team until you get there. So it was very important.
And I was one of the people that had to sort of translate those looks into M.A.C products.
Yeah.
And I always think that Lee could have actually designed makeup products because he was so specific and almost a bit ahead of his time in what he wanted for a skin texture, how he wanted the light to bounce off the skin. The best thing that I could carry in the kit for a McQueen show was a pestle and mortar.
Absolutely.
Because we never had one product that would create what he wants. It was always a mixture. We'd have like liquid foundation mixed with pearl powder, mixed with metallic powder, with white pigment. We had to basically concoct all these amazing textures. Were actually in his mind.
They were in his mind, and he really was futuristic in his approach to beauty. He wanted that kind of mannequin, sort of like plasticized real skin. I mean, he called it super skin, and those products didn't exist then. So yeah, we were making it up as we went along, really.
And tell me a bit about how he'd brief you. I'm interested. Would he give you an idea of the inspiration for the show and then kind of leave you to suggest things, or would he come to you and say, you know, I'm imagining a black lip, I'm imagining this, or was it much more fluid than that?
I mean, there would be a meeting, like I said before, a month before the show, and he would sort of like show you his references. Maybe there was some sort of like, you know, like a medieval reference of a certain type of woman, mixed that up with some kind of like metal madness music, and you know, he'd sort of saying like, I'm thinking about a lip, but you know, it's not just a lip; it has to be a McQueen lip. And so, you know, so then we'd go, Guido and I would go away and, you know, we'd do some trials there in Lee's studio, and, you know, we'd probably spend the whole day there, and we'd photograph everything, and then, you know, Lee would say it and Katie would say whether they liked it or not, and we'd keep going and we'd keep going. You know, we kept going until we got it, you know.
As a team also, it was completely different to any other look that we did on any other show at the time. I mean, it was such a specific story. I remember doing a lot of decay.
Yes, there was always, I mean, Lee's idea of beauty was not the norm. You know, it wasn't, you know, often he mentioned the word minimalism, but Lee's idea of minimal was something else, you know.
A lot of cadaverous sort of body skins and kind of bony faces and small eyes. It was almost like anti-beauty.
It was anti-beauty.
It was the opposite of everything else we were doing.
Yes, because there was no other shows where, you know, we were changing the shape of faces. We were sort of like moulding and stretching, and, you know, drag queen face tapes were like really important. You know, we were sort of like really stretching the skin.
And painkillers.
And painkillers, yes. The models.
Lots of Nurofen for the tapes.
Yes. You know, so, yeah, he really liked that honed to the bone sort of skin. You know.
It's interesting because I think people presume a lot in fashion, particularly with kind of current runway shows, that the makeup is almost like a complement, like it's an extension of an accessory. It's something that kind of is there to support the clothes, but it's not the kind of main act. But it really feels like to him he saw it as a huge part
Absolutely.
of the story.
Lee wanted a character. He wanted his woman. He wasn't interested in skin. You know, it had to be McQueen's skin. So, and also, what was great about working with Lee is that his makeup, we didn't have like big photographic crews backstage. I think probably one of the only people allowed backstage to photograph was Nick Knight. But, you know, there was no sort of like backstage photography. We weren't using mobile phones. So the makeup was made for the lighting. It was made for the stage. It was, you know, sometimes if you, like in the Jones show, I remember Erin O'Connor going like, oh my God, I'm so ugly. Because, you know, she was wearing a bald cap and I'd taken away her eyebrows. You know, we kind of like waxed over the eyebrows and, you know, it was Studio Fix foundation powdered on because it was like thick and matte. But on the catwalk, it just looked completely different because it was for the lights.
There are not a lot of backstage stills at all, are there?
No.
Because almost like that makeup didn't make sense off the runway.
Yeah.
No.
It's only when it went on the runway under the light that it suddenly made sense. It was really cinematic.
It's interesting to think about when you say on the runway, because it's not like his runways were the same every show, and I imagine that added to the complexity of it, because, you know, sometimes it was a glass box, sometimes it was a wind tunnel. It was almost like, you know, a different piece of theatre every time. Did that make the challenge even more difficult? I can imagine one makeup look could have worked in a show and not another.
I think the thing was, you didn't know how it was, you didn't know what was inside Lee's head until you saw the rehearsal.
Yeah.
So you hadn't heard the music, you hadn't seen the clothes, you hadn't seen Sean Lean's jewellery go on. You know, I hadn't seen Guido's finished hair until we did the rehearsal. We didn't know what it was going to be, you know. And thank God for the lovely Robert Farrer sort of giving us all these amazing backstage images, because without him we wouldn't have any, because it just didn't exist then. You know.
Tell me, Val, do you remember your first show? Because your first show was the birds. I think that's right. How did you come to work with him?
Okay, so my first show was very funny. I'd arrived in England and I met this sort of like group of people. One of them was Eugene Suleiman, one of them was Katie England, and we used to work for the Evening Standard and do these like outrageous little sort of like mini shoots. And Katie was really kind of this very progressive stylist, and she sort of came to me one day and sort of said, oh, look, I've been asked to do this show by this guy, you know, called Alexander McQueen. You know, do you want to do it with me? And I was like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. Yeah, let's do a show. And so, you know, go and meet Lee. He was in Hoxton, and, you know, he was like sewing the dresses himself in this tiny sort of like little room. And, you know, we're going to do the show. And I had meetings with Katie and Lee was like, yeah, I'm thinking about sort of an orange lip. I want to kind of, nothing else really, just an orange lip. I think I had 2 assistants. It was just me and 2 assistants. And, okay, so I'd come and I'd show them an orange lip, and I'd show them an orange lip, and I'd show them an orange lip. No. This was not the right orange. It had to be a specific orange. And I think it was Katie, in the end, that found this one old tube, I think it was a Coty, orange lipstick that she found in a bargain bin of a 99p shop in Southall. And that's true. And that is the only lipstick, that was the lipstick that did, I think it was something like 25, 30 models of the show. You know, that was it, you know. It
was the only one that was sick enough.
It was, exactly, and it was like a chalky orange. Yeah. It was the only one that was stick enough.
I always remember Val talked a lot about sick colour, a sick pink, a sick beige, a sick red. Decay.
I want to delve a little bit deeper into these little terms. You said she said sick a lot, but you guys, before we kind of started, you were throwing around these amazing words and little codes that you'd shared backstage for certain makeup looks, and they were fantastic. Can you tell us some of them? Because they're quite naughty, some of them.
Should we start with a clean
one? I was
one?
quite outraged.
Well, let's start with it. Well, what's a clean one? Tell me a clean one.
Botox beauty.
Oh, well, Botox beauty. I mean, that was my terminology for the show we did, which was called Voss. And because Lee wanted, you know, he wanted them stretched, honed to the bone, and this sort of like Botox thing was just quite new. This was like 2000, and magazines like, you know, Harper's Bazaar, I remember they were doing like a feature on like people that were having Botox, and nobody was really talking about it, you know, but it was this new thing that we should all be doing. And I was like, I know, this is what we're doing. It's Botox beauty. It's, you know, for the new generation. And so that was one term.
Because that show also, it opened with the box having mirrors, so the audience...
Oh, no, the great thing about that show... the great thing about that show... Yeah. Sorry. The great thing about that show was...
I'll just do the cues.
Do the cues.
I'll get her going.
No, the great thing about that show was that... we go into this auditorium, this big sort of space, I think it was Gatkill Road, somewhere down... Anyway, it doesn't matter. But there was this great big glass box, and Lee purposely made sure that the show was 2 hours late. And so the audience would come in and sit down in the auditorium, but they were all looking at themselves in a mirror. So there's this big mirror there. So everybody's sort of like sitting there for 2 hours, and you know that there's somebody next to you, and you don't want to look like you're sort of like... doing that, but you really want to get that bit at the top. But, you know, so everybody was sort of like feeling a little bit uncomfortable and awkward. That's what was so great about that show. And then suddenly, you know, the lights come on and you sort of see inside. I'm going to talk all about the show now. You see inside the show, you see inside the box, and it's these like beautiful girls, like they're in an asylum. There's also another box inside the box, but the girls are sort of like walking around like they're sort of like demented sort of creatures.
But they also looked a bit Tippi Hedren, didn't they? They looked a bit Hitchcock at the same time.
Because that was one of his references, asylum.
But a bit tragic and a bit sanatorium.
Yes, and I can always remember Erin O'Connor in that red dress. You know, it was just fabulous. So the show goes on, and you know, at one point, you know, Erin sort of like smashes all the bottom of her dress. I forget what the shells were called, but anyway.
Razor clams.
Razor clams. And then we come to the finale of the show, and during the show, I've got these two lovely little assistants, Charlie Pichon and another little girl. I can't remember what her name is. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I had these 2 very small assistants, and they were important because they had to go inside the box that was in the box, before the show. They had an hour to, with honey, put these moths on this lovely lady called Michelle Ollie, put all these sort of moths on her, these sort of like sedated moths, and Michelle had to sort of like sit in this box, you know, through the duration of the show. It was very hot in there, and then all of a sudden, you know, there's this sound that comes on, and it's the sound of flatlining, like, and you know, and then the box starts to smash, and then all the butterflies just sort of like come out. It was kind of.
It was the Joel Whitkins recreation.
It was, yes, it was a recreation of a 1989 picture called Sanitarium. As we were talking earlier, Lee was, you know, very influenced.
And the detail in that was amazing, I remember. Even bird droppings on the helmet.
Oh my gosh, incredible.
Yeah, there was the detail on that was amazing.
So, for example, what did he brief you for a show like that? Because that's such a concept show, and it's one that is so celebrated. You know, it's one of his most famous now. Do you remember him coming to you and what did he say to you? Because I can't imagine someone trying to explain that show before it happens.
He said, I want them to look, you know, embryonic, sort of a little bit alien, a bit newborn, almost like they're bursting out of their skin.
That was another Valism. I wanted a newborn skin and a newborn eye, which usually meant full coverage, but beautiful.
It was always but beautiful, full coverage but beautiful.
And a lot of beige or white pencil in the eye.
And bleached eyebrow.
Bleached eyebrows. And usually a bit of blush, which kind of had that sort of Tibetan windburn feel to it.
Yes, it was all
I've
about
never done
windburn.
blush the same ever, having worked on McQueen shows. It's always higher on the cheek and it goes across the nose.
And you were
It
saying
looks
he did
more like a burn.
a tan very differently to other people as well, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, it was a very, very weathered tan, which was never kind of beachy and gorgeous. It wasn't a luxe tan.
You're painting a really aspirational picture of his beauty. You always like, it was ugly.
No, he wanted his woman to be different.
Yeah.
You know, when he was sort of saying, you know, when we did the Twisted Bull show, that was, you know, he said, I want them to sort of like look a little bit weathered.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there wasn't a tanning product on the market then like we have today that would give us the overall sort of effect that we wanted. But I found this old Guerlain Teint Doré, and you'd have to put it on with cotton wool. And, you know, we were using that because it just made them look like they were wearing gravy browning.
Yeah.
You know? So it was all that sort of, you know.
Well, the effect was more of a tan created by and shipwrecked on a desert island, having a tan created by salt water. Everything had a kind of romanticism.
There was a reason. There was a reason for everything.
Romanticism, and just very weathered. To me, it was the other side of aspirational beauty. You know, it was just looking at it in a different way. Much more of a story rather than something that someone should aspire to. I mean, everything just seemed to be the right way to show off fashion, his clothes, the right story to tell.
But do you remember when we were doing Voss, we're going back to Voss now, but do you remember when Karen Elson, she was wearing that big neck piece and she was coming off the runway and we're sort of all sort of stood there backstage, and just as she was coming off she tripped, and backstage there was this big kind of like as we all caught her.
Death by bustier.
Death by Sean Lee necklace.
It sounds like there were a lot of happenings like that though, like, you know, backstage and kind of front of house. It sounds like everything was kind of, you did have these amazing moments and some slightly chaotic, and you seem to have amazing memories of kind of, you know, you were painting pictures of...
Well, apart from fear.
Yeah.
It was fear, yeah.
Because Val used to put the fear of God in you. I mean, it was so, as you all know, it was so highly technical, and there was such a point you had to reach with makeup, more so than we did on any other show. The worst is when you could hear Val's breath at the back of your neck. And usually you just hear a, right, which knew you hadn't quite got there. Then there was a, great, which meant you'd almost got there but not quite. And then a shrill from the other side of the room, which was like, gorgeous, which means she knew you'd got it right.
Did you find
followed by the referee's whistle occasionally.
You must have found yourself in that position quite a lot, though, Val. I guess trying to brief a team must have been quite hard when it was such a kind of specific thing. Did you ever find yourself just wanting to do every girl yourself? I know that would have been impossible, but...
Well...
That would have killed us.
Yes. But I think I like to be a team player. And I want my makeup artists... I want to be inspired by my makeup artists. So I want to... I need a team. We can't do this... I can't do this on my own. I need a team with me. And, so very early on, I found my key members, who are all here tonight, to, be there with me. And, I just relied on them heavily. I mean, they were great.
We all wanted to do the best work on that show.
And when I was first working with M.A.C, if I didn't have Tony or Terry, there was no show. They've got to be there. And Terry was with me, and I'd go up to Terry and I'd go, actually, we'd go outside and have a cigarette. Yeah. And I'd go like, Terry, what do you think? I mean, do you think we've got there? I was a bit unsure about that one over there. Do you think we need to look at that? And, it was just a great sounding board. I was very fortunate to have, and still do have, a great team.
We always wanted to do great work on the shows. Yeah. We knew we were part of something really special doing that show. Yeah. We really cared.
I was going to ask that because an interesting thing, now it's hard to imagine, but at the time, we talk, like he was such a celebrated designer and we all talk about how acclaimed his work was, but at the time, he did have his critics and people were not always kind about his shows, even people who now say how fantastic he was. And you must have been aware of that as well, that kind of the controversy surrounding him sometimes.
But I think... what I loved about Lee was that, he didn't care what you thought of him as long as that you acknowledged it. And, I love someone who takes a risk, and I mean, I know that I do that in my work a lot. So it just, it was great because it felt like we were doing something that nobody else was doing at that time. And, you just wanted to be a part of it,
I think there was a lot of people who only saw the subversive in it. They didn't see the romanticism in it as well. Because he went dark and he went hard with it. But there was always a really beautiful story to tell. Like, he was kind of fascinated by Grimm's fairy tales and things like that.
Yes, Grimm's fairy tales were very important.
But, I mean, subversive, yes, but absolutely beautifully crafted.
Let's talk about a show that does kind of highlight that, which is What a Merry-Go-Round from Autumn/Winter 2001, because I know that's one that's quite important to you. And that's an interesting one because it does really completely kind of push the boundaries of, you're saying, you're doing things that no one else was doing. And tell me a bit about the look that was there and how you created it.
That show, It's a Merry-Go-Round, that's like the least talked about McQueen show. It received a lot of flack. People didn't really like it. But I think that was the first time that, I think Lee had left Givenchy and, this was him concentrating on his brand. And, it was the darkest of the darkest McQueen shows. And, we had these... and that's what was great for us in the early days of McQueen was like, we'd have the show makeup, the general makeup, but then there would always be the specials. What are the specials? Yeah. And in this show, like, our models, he sort of said, I want a lip. But you knew it wasn't going to be a normal lip. Can
you give me the Valism for what you...
The Valism for a Val lip is known to my team as a CSL. This is like a terminology that I use to describe a lip,
we
which
know
is
exactly
carnal.
What it is.
Those that are in the audience that were on my team, you know that when I say a CSL, I'm talking about a carnal lip.
No, you're not.
What does it stand for?
It stands for a cock-sucking lip.
It's a Val signature.
It's so this was a more malicious CSL. Yes, it was a lot more graphic. We, Lee wanted this sort of like gang girl kind of woman. And so we had this kind of like 3-dot tattoo high up on the cheekbone. And then all the girls had this sort of like black into sort of burgundy, bright red center, almost vaginal perhaps. So that was the general lip of the show. And then the show was set in a sort of like a toy shop, like a Victorian toy shop, and it was a very sexual show, like the girls, like the clothes were like really short. They'd never been that short before. And, you know, the girls looked like they were coming back from a club. We had kind of like stripper poles that were on the sort of like the carousel that the girls were twirling around there. And then, you know, the sort of like epic finale was, you know, the lights go down and then up comes the circus of...
Full-on phantasmagoria.
It was phantasmagoria. And, you know, Kirsten Owen was in there, and I don't think you'd be able to guess which one she was. You know, and I think Erin O'Connor sort of like dragged a golden skeleton around the stage. But, you know, as makeup artists, we love to do makeup. And so, you know, when Lee sort of said, I want, you know, some sort of like macabre, horrific clowns, we were like, gorgeous.
It is almost makeup as disguise in that context, wasn't it?
And it's actually really interesting that at the McQueen show, the models, even the big models, were prepared to be anonymous. You know, prepared to be so generic or masked. The fact that it was a McQueen show, you know, part of such an amazing production.
There's one thing that I found interesting about that show, and is, you know, a lot of the girls, as you said, you know, the ones that have the kind of the real show look where their face is completely painted. You didn't extend the painting onto the body, and I'm interested in the decision behind that. Did you do a lot of body painting, or did it focus a lot on the face?
It was a mask.
It was a mask.
Yeah.
It was a mask, and that idea of a mask, I believe, carries through today in his shows. You know, I think I first felt we saw the mask in the Jones show, right at the very beginning. But you know, you still see that today. But then now it's more sort of like material. It's actual sort of like millinery, I suppose. But we didn't extend it to the body because there was no need. You know, that body was full of face and body. Get it pale. You know, get the pearlized in there. It's interesting because there was no, there wasn't a particular sort of foundation. We were sort of like trying to make our foundations, you know, for the McQueen show. But there was this one foundation that M.A.C made that probably wasn't doing very well because nobody wanted to have a pearly white face. So it was like stuck in the back of a M.A.C cupboard somewhere. You know, the general public weren't interested in it, but Val Garland was. I remembered seeing this hyper-real foundation come through. And I remember sort of like ringing up, I think it was Gordon, and sort of saying, have you got any of that hyper-real foundation? He's like, yeah, we've got loads of it in the cupboard, like, you know. And I'm like, well, I want it, I want all of it. And, you know, so that was an integral part.
Well, do you remember we did a violet studio fit.
Yes.
And that gave you exactly the cold light, because everything was cold lit on McQueen. It wasn't kind of warm, peachy skin. You know, which is why we were so specific about that skin texture. A lot of it was lighting. A lot of overhead light and lower light as well.
Yes.
So you've got almost this kind of
skeletal
ghostliness to it, or skeletal aspect.
How often did you find yourself doing kind of multiple beauty looks within one show? Because also, just with his casting, you know, he did often cast like quite diverse girls of different ethnicities, even just at different looks, you know, often like redheads or, you know, very different. How often did you find yourself having to kind of create multiple looks?
Well, I think it was not every show.
Do you remember the one with the changes?
Oh, right, that show. Now, that was...
Always a nightmare.
Always a nightmare. That was... Which show was that? That was Erere. Erere, one of my favourite shows. And my team know me. That sort of show was basically like some of the girls would be pirates, and then some of the girls would be conquistadors.
And Amazonian goddesses and conquistadors.
Yes, and then they would end up as the one where
Giselle
was.
Shipwrecked.
But they were shipwrecked.
Hence the tan.
But yes.
Yeah.
And the shipwreck thing, girls would come out with this kind of like little black banana under their eyes, and that would be fine for like kind of like 10 or so girls. And then backstage, we're there at the entrance, you know, with water sprays, spraying the clothes and spraying the makeup. I think it was cream liner, MAC cream liner, so that it would run. And, you know, we didn't know if it was going to work or not. It was, yes, we'd practiced it, but still, you never know how it's going to look, how your water spray is going to look. Katie England's shouting at me backstage, it's too much black! You know, and this this is awful now, because I can remember pushing one of my assistants out the way, going, let me get to that girl, like, you know, it was like mayhem, but, you know, but that was the change. Yeah. That was the change, you know. In that show.
It does sound like it was pretty kind of wonderfully chaotic backstage. And before you were talking about bomb scares, you were talking about, tell me about just what that atmosphere was like being there. Because as you said, there isn't much reportage from it, so very precious few people saw.
Yes, it was incredibly tense backstage. You'd get there like having had no sleep, and, you know, Sam Gainsbury would be, I think, walking around with a megaphone, you know. And so there was all that going on, and like there was like the hair team and the makeup team, and the hair team would have the girls and we'd want the girls. There was that, you know, tug and to and fro between hair and makeup, and, you know, invariably things would happen, you know, like there was one time, I think that was at Eshu, where there was a bomb scare. So we've only got a certain amount of time to get the looks done, and we're all trying to be on point. And you know, there's a bomb scare and we've all got to leave the building.
Oh, we were like, no way.
No, really.
Just, you know, bomb us, we'll finish the show.
Exactly. It's true.
We're Londoners, we're used to it.
And then there was another time, I think this was...
Blitz spirit.
Exactly. There was another time that was, this was in the Overlook. And so many things went wrong with that show. You know, we started and that show was all set on ice. And one of the production girls, you know, like very early, I just arrived at the venue to see an ambulance going through, going, nee, 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 like pulling up, and one of the production girls going out on a stretcher, and somebody sort of, I think she might have broken something, hope it's not her back, you know, over one production assistant down, and off she went. And then, and I remember during that show, I kept sort of saying, I can smell burning. I can smell burning. Does anybody else smell burning? And like Guido was saying the same. And no, nobody could smell burning. And anyway, we got to the final lineup, and the girls are all in their outfits, and they're just about to go out. And, oh no, there was other things that happened in that show as well. They're just about to go out, and a fire. There's a fire just over there. The clothes are all here. There's a fire. It's an electrical fire. Guido's equipment. That's my glasses. And, you know, and I'm thinking, they're all ready. We've worked so hard. We cannot go anywhere. They're going out the front, and if we have to leave, they're going to have to walk off the front of the catwalk. So, you know, it was crazy.
It sounds very crazy.
I think it was the focus that we had that made it more crazy, though. Because at the time, there weren't photographers backstage like there are now. It wasn't everybody like photographing their sandwiches for Instagram and God knows what. I think it was just more the actual knowing what we had to achieve in that time and what the final result would be. It was just really intense.
Because everyone who collaborates with him say that, you know, he brought the best out of them, and they're never quite sure how he managed to do that. And is that something that you both felt?
Yes, I mean, you know, when Lee walked into the room during the show, and he'd be sort of like looking down at the makeup, you'd be like, please God, please God, please God, please God, don't not like anything, you know.
Did he ever change at last minute?
Well, sometimes he's like, I want to see her in the light, let's see her in the light. And, you know, and he's, of course, I mean, you know, there's always changes. I mean, you know, it's human. And, but we just, you know, we got on with it. And you know, you'd see everybody was sweating. We were sweating to get it done, you know, and to get it done right, because we all wanted his approval, you know, we wanted him to be happy, you know.
The models were great with it as well, because I think they knew they were part of something amazing. You know, so they weren't divaing around.
Let's talk about some more shows specifically. I do want to ask a bit about his use of colour. It's not something perhaps we've talked about so far, which is you see a lot in the Dance of the Twisted Bull from Spring Summer 2002, you know, that amazing red, but also you do see it in things like, I think like Eshu with the yellows. Tell me a bit about colour and how that played a part, because a lot of what we've spoken about was skin and black and white.
I think that if it was a colour that came from nature, then he was interested in it. He wasn't interested in colour for colour's sake.
Or an emotion.
Yeah, it had to have emotion, or it had to have some kind of like natural element, an existence. And so for the Tale of the Twisted Bull, he wanted to feel like, you know, there was that alien thing again, but there was a reality thing, and he wanted this sort of like egg-shaped eye, but it needed to have a sense of passion and lust. So therefore it was a red overlaid with a purple and maybe a bit of navy thrown in as well. And it had to be incredibly matte. So that's what he was asking for there.
It was very anatomical, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He was almost obsessed with the skull.
With structure.
Yeah, it was almost like he was obsessed more with the structure underneath than the skin itself.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So you'd create eye shapes which are based on the bone rather than creating a classic feline. And everything had this kind of strength of light to it. I always remember that the girls looked almost like they were in really strong overhead sunlight, and it was that exact shadow you get. And edged in red, that kind of blood red at the edge. It was never a kind of... Colour had to be there for a purpose.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in Eshu it was kind of the idea that it was, symbolic of a ritualism, I can't say that it would be quite tribal, like something perhaps that an African tribe would do. Sometimes he had a lot of humour. Sometimes he was just, why do we have girls in kiss makeup? Well, why not? Sometimes it was just like that.
It was quite kind of whimsical as well. He liked elements of humour. It was quite witty.
Yeah,
like the spears through the body on Dance of the Twisted Bull.
Yeah.
Like the spears coming out, which kind of looked a bit like a carry-on film. It had a little bit of humour to it. Beautiful, but...
You told me about having to do expressions on some girls as well, using makeup to create kind of emotions.
Yeah, on Merry-Go-Round, it's almost like the girls had to have a little bit of a sinister smile.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about doing a perfect lip. You actually had to paint a very subtle expression that went with the story. There was a lot of kind of standing back and a lot of removal, not just kind of pure perfection. It was quite expressionist.
And I'm interested also because I think some of the shows that perhaps at first glance to someone who doesn't know makeup as well as you both do, some of the shows do look incredibly simple, but I imagine in some ways they would kind of almost as complex, if not more complex. And one of those is, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, it's Panthea's Lecum from Autumn Winter 04. And that's a really interesting one because I think at first glance it looks so pure, but I imagine it goes back to what you're saying, you're kind of caking it on. How did you create that one?
Well, I think, this was the epitome of McQueen skin,
This was newborn to the max.
This was newborn minimalism, and this was where we really honed the hyper-real, and, it doesn't photograph like it looked on the catwalk, because when the light hit it, and that sort of like lilac, pearlized reflect came to life.
Which I think was about 15 products.
Yeah,
a white, a shine white, possibly a metallic, a lilac, more white on top.
Yes, and it was just because he wanted the girls to look a bit sort of like Grecian statues. And in fact, that was the last show that I did with Lee, and for me, when the girl is standing in the light at the end, they did look very much like cherubic angels, being airlifted to the Star Trek spaceship.
It was a very past and future reference to that show. Because I think in all McQueen shows there was this element of kind of past,
completely,
and an element of futurism. So it was that idea of them almost looking kind of Grecian, or almost like Adam, Adam and Eve, and the end is a kind of spaceship.
And sometimes, when you're right in the thick of it, you were thinking, I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know where he's coming from. But it's only in retrospect that you see that, of course, it was very forward.
You have to go on Google to sort of translate the names of the shows sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone has their own names for them, don't they, completely? Yeah. And tell me, this is it's a simplistic question in some ways, it's probably impossible, but do you have any favourites? Do you have a favourite?
I do have a favourite, and I think my favourite show is the show called Number 13. And this show had so many beautiful elements in it. One of them was the lovely Amy Mullins, who is disabled. She was wearing these like wooden legs, and I think just before that we had shot her for a great story with Nick Knight for Dazed magazine. So to actually have her in the show, and a lot of people in the audience, they didn't realise that you know, she was a
They just thought they were
disabled
amazing
Olympian.
boots.
You know, just like, where do you get those wooden boots? You know, and so that was fantastic. And I remember there was girls that came out and stood on these little sort of like circles, and they were like the little toys you get inside of a jewellery box, like sort of like little fairies. And there was this lovely sort of like tinkly sort of like music. It was one of those shows that it made you, you know, give you hair on your skin. And then, you know, the climax of that show where, you know, Shalom Harlow goes out there, and nobody had ever seen anything quite like this. And the funny thing about that was we didn't rehearse it. That was it going to work or was it not going to work? No one knew until we got out there and, you know, the robots started up. It was, and I think that's the one and only time I ever saw Lee
We could
cry.
see Lee, at the side of the stage crying, so excited.
You know.
Really?
Yeah.
It must have been amazing working with him.
It was incredible. Yeah, what an experience. Almost as much as I possibly could, we would bleach eyebrows. If we didn't have to, then if Lee required there to be no brow at all, then we would blank them.
I think sometimes also we didn't bleach them fully.
No, like
Sometimes we kind of like this weird, sick, mustardy colour.
Yes, which was
from a half bleach.
Yeah, which was Panthium and Leckham show. Yeah,
slightly kind of mouldy bleached eyebrow rather.
Yeah,
than,
mushroom
rather than
brow.
A platinum.
Yeah, yeah.
We used to take down eyebrows just with concealer a lot of the time, just to push them back a little bit and powder them.
Yeah. Oh, it's another day at the office, darling.
The darkness, though, was a thing of beauty, right?
But, darling, you know, I mean, we're makeup artists. We love a bit of darkness.
We
love
didn't
it.
have to be persuaded into darkness.
No.
Most of us were already dark, you know. We were probably just a bunch of old goths working on a festival.
Absolutely.
But it was just so beautiful, and I just think that different way of looking at beauty and that questioning of what is beautiful just seemed so right for the time, and it just really inspired us, I guess.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think it is. I think, you know, if you stop being controversial, then, you know, you become ordinary, you know, and who wants to be ordinary? And, I mean, look at the fabulous Gareth Pugh. He's not conventional. He's fabulous. Do you know what I mean? No, I think we should push the boundaries. Always.
Hi, Gareth. So embarrassed.
Oh my God. Hi, Gareth. I didn't realise you were there. Have I gone red? I think, you know, what Lee gave to me was to always push yourself further, to always go that extra mile, to never be content, always question, is this right, is this enough, can I take this somewhere else? And, you know, he gave me some of the most fantastic moments in my career that will always live with me, and wasn't I lucky to be a part of it? So, yes.
And it's been fascinating hearing from both of you, and I think it's given a lot of perspective into what an incredibly creative man he was, because I think the most creative people, they bring the best out of other people, and from what you say, that sounds exactly like what he did. So thank you so much, Val. Thank you, Terry. And let's all go home and practice minimal newborn.